Good afternoon and welcome to this live stream of Rescaled. And with us we have Veronique. You are the coordinator of Rescaled for the Netherlands. Remind us, for the people who haven't seen this before, what is the Rescaled movement?
Rescaled is a European movement and currently in 5 European countries. So in the Netherlands, France, Norway, Belgium and Portugal. And what we aim for is in the future to not have any prisons anymore, but to have small-scale detention houses and alternatives, I would like to add.
Yes, and so these detention houses have 3 pillars. First of all, they need to be small-scale, so look a little bit like a house. 2, they need to be community integrated. What does that mean?
That the houses are not somewhere on a outside of the city in the middle of nowhere, but that they are actually part of the city. And this is exactly I think what Annie and Indira our work is about. Yes. How do you integrate a house within a city?
Because the idea is a bit, we have people that have, let's say, difficulties to fully function normally in our society, and then we think if we lock them up far away from our society on an industrial zone, they'll probably learn to be better citizens, and that has proven for 200 years to be wrong. So we think it should be more integrated in communities. And then the third pillar is diversification. Why do we want to talk about that pillar also today?
This means that we shouldn't create solutions one size fits all, but we should look at what does a person, an individual needs in order to become part of society and be part of society. And actually, I think in many cases, the question and the workload is not only on the individual shoulders, but also on society's shoulders.
Yes. So the idea is right now we have one system that fits all, and it's basically designed for the, let's say, the most difficult people, the high flight risk. It's focused on security. How many people in our current prisons fit that description? Is that a majority or is that a small minority?
Personally, I think it's a small minority, because when you look at the numbers, maybe Annie will tell later about the numbers in the US, but in the Netherlands, about 60% of the people in detention currently have addiction problems. Almost 70% of the people in prison have low IQ and don't have any education, for example. So these, to me, are actually figures that say people that have problems keeping up pace within our society end up in prison easily, or more easily at least. And I think we did create a very complex society in which not everyone finds it that easy to find his or her own place. So,
okay,
yeah.
And so then one of the things we definitely want to differentiate on is the level of security. For a few people we need high walls, high fences because they're a flight risk. For most that is to a lesser extent or not at all a problem. So the level of security, that is definitely one aspect we have to differentiate on. But what are some other issues we have to differentiate?
Well, you're actually saying it like we should first differentiate on security levels and then look further. I don't think that's the case at all. We should look at the individual and then look at what the individual needs are, but also in relation to society and vice versa. So I think there could be hundreds of ways to differentiate in types of houses, in terms of providing care or community integration. So for me,
there's a whole lot of aspects they should be differentiated on.
Security is just one of the many.
One of the things. But then, if we differentiate it very much, we need an individual house with 1 inhabitant for every person. How far should we take this differentiation?
Well, maybe we should take it that far.
Okay. And then,
provide good housing.
Okay, and so some people, some words are flowing in. Some people say, of course, security level, but also work and formation, contact with society, gender. So maybe some people want a house for different genders. Distance to the city. work options, accompaniment, activities, schooling options, reintegration programs, and mental health care. These are some things we need. Oh, and more are flowing in. Activities, age. Oh, maybe someone thinks we should have houses for different ages, programs. Okay, a lot of things are flowing in right now. Okay, so if we then differentiate, then let's say we have a small amount is still security first houses for people where the flight risk is very high and we need to keep them in. But we say most of the people need a house where that's not the main concern. You could say then we're going to build a detention house for all these people, but you could also say let's try to find a house that already exists to put these people in. Where does that notion come from?
When I started with Rescaled, and the ideal is that we shouldn't have prisons anymore and we should only have small scale detention houses. But immediately my biggest fear is that we will put the 30,000 people that are now in prison, that we will put them in detention houses. That's my biggest fear, because I think a large group of the people that are now in prison do not belong there in the first place. And so they don't belong in prison, so they do not belong in detention houses as well. But then that leaves the question, where do they belong? And then I started looking at care facilities and all these different type of facilities that are actually in the Netherlands. There are more than 50,000 facilities where people can for a short stay there and live there. And so I think we first need to look much closer in how we can differentiate on what things we will differentiate, and maybe somebody needs just more care, so they don't need to be sent to a detention house, but then a care facility. Or
okay, and if you take this one step further, would you say we should strive for putting people as much in houses that already exist, because then we can provide the best care and best counseling for the needs that they have, so as a means? Or should it be a goal to minimize the amount of people in a detention house, because that's inherently wrong?
Well, that depends completely on how you want to reshape the system and reshape the needs of the people that are now in prison. I think detention house is one of the many important means that we can use in order to decrease the prison population. But like I said, it's one of the things and means we need to do.
One of the things. Can you give more examples of what are some of the houses that already exist that would be suited to house certain people that are currently in prisons?
Well, for that, I'm really glad that Annie and Indira are here today, because I think they know much better what type of houses already exist, and also the examples and the stories behind it. So I would say
let's go. Okay, then I think one question we have left is what? Oh, I have to press this button. Why would we then still want to place people in dedicated detention houses? So what are some reasons? It's also an open question to the people in the audience. What would be some reasons to say, no, we need, for these kind of people, we need specific detention houses? And again, we're not so much talking about the people that have a high flight risk and probably a long sentence, but a lot of people in somewhere the middle group. Why would it still be a good argument to build a detention house for them?
Personally, and I think that's also something that Indira and Annie worked on as well, but there will always be a group or at least people that need some kind of isolation somehow, and maybe it's only for one day, maybe it's for a month. In some cases it's because it's a threat for society, but in some cases also because for themselves they need they need to be taken away from their direct environment in some cases for a short while. So there will always be a small group.
Yeah, and there is one where the first words are flowing in, and some people say justice. It's also a punishment is also a part of why we put people in prison right now. Yeah, and if people just go to a care house, do we then have enough justice, or do we have enough punishment then?
justice and punishment are two very different things, and it's
Mm-hmm.
very important not to mix these two. Justice should be done, but punishment is the means by which we have always done it. That doesn't mean we need to keep doing that.
Yeah.
So justice should be done, yes, but both ways,
Both
both
ways.
to the individual and society.
Yes. Okay. And some people are also saying keep a link with society, suitable care and treatment. Maybe there are reasons that people that have fallen into criminality need into a special house for that group because there they can get the best care for what they do. Well, this is what we're going to discover much more. Veronique, in the end, I'm also going to ask you to join more in our discussion, but thank you so much for introducing the topic we're going to talk today. Veronique, we have two people coming from the world of architecture today. Are we going to talk about how houses should look?
For me, I'm so proud to be that these two speakers and thinkers actually will have joined us. I don't know how they would define themselves, but I don't see them as architect. I know Indira has a different background, but to me, Annie's work is much broader than that, and from a social justice perspective and using design. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about architecture, but from a much broader perspective.
Much better. Okay, well, thank you so much. Let's go to our speakers. Indira van 't Klooster, good afternoon. You're the director of ARCAM, the Center of Architecture Amsterdam, and you have done so many things. What is your connection to the world of detention?
Well, right now the connection is our exhibition that opened last week, which is called Safe Spaces, Claims for Space in Society. So we do not specifically focus on detention houses, but we do focus on social claims and how they can be made visible in architecture, and as such also reflect on the dialogue in society.
Yes, great. Okay, you're going to give a presentation afterwards. I'm going to do Annie Count. You're of the Mass Design Group. What do you do?
I'm an architect and an advocate for restorative justice. And I'll talk more about it shortly, but it's really trying to broaden what our definition of justice is.
What was from you the link? Is it a coincidence that you're both an architect and an advocate for restorative justice, or is there a very clear link between the two?
There's a very clear link, I think, between the two. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, please join us and show us your presentation.
Thank you for having me. I am so honored to be here. My name is Annie Kuntz. Like I said, I'm an architect and an advocate for restorative justice. This is my passion. This is what keeps me up at night, and this is what gets me up in the morning. I can talk endlessly about this, but this needs to be a short presentation with some really big ideas. So I'm going to try to be concise. I work with Mass Design Group. We believe that design is never neutral. It either heals or it hurts. And nowhere is this statement more poignant than in prisons. Mass founded the Restorative Justice Design Lab. We leverage design to imagine alternatives, highlight spatial injustices, and advocate for decarceration and prison abolition. We are partnered by many incredible organizations who are all committed to securing equal justice, ending mass incarceration, and strengthening families and communities. Today, I'm going to discuss the history of prisons, and I'm going to bore you with a lot of statistics, and I'm probably going to depress you too. But please bear with me because I hope to also offer hope. But first, I think it is really important to understand that there are people, real human beings behind all of these numbers. So I'm going to freak all of you out, and I'm going to overshare with a bunch of strangers a really deeply personal story. When I was in college, we lost my dad to cancer. My brother was 17. He was angry and grief-struck. And then some guy stole money from his girlfriend. So my brother beat him up. There was no hospital, no broken bones. But of course, my brother never should have done that. He made a mistake. But what if it could have been just a teenage mistake? What if at that moment they had the chance to sit, to acknowledge the harms and resolve the conflict? What if my brother had been given grief counseling, trauma therapy? What if my brother had had access to the hands-on education that his physical and mechanical mind so desperately needed and he never got from the public schools? What if my family had access to affordable healthcare and cancer treatment for our dad? Instead, we were told that a jury would see my brother as a thug. We were threatened with a 15 to 20-year sentence for a 17-year-old boy who got in a fight. And like most terrified, resource-poor families, we took a plea deal. And while I completed my fancy pants education, my equally intelligent and capable brother was imprisoned, hundreds of miles away, racially indoctrinated, and tortured in solitary confinement for 7 years. By some miracle of unconditional love and maybe some really great books, my brother managed to grow within this most repressive architecture. Today, he has a family, 2 adorable daughters. He has a home, a stable career in construction, and he's even hoping to own his own business. My brother is extraordinary, but this story is ordinary. This story has happened to millions and millions of families in America and across the world. There are about 7 million people under carceral control in the United States. This is more than Stalin's gulags. The supposed land of the free has the highest incarceration rate in the world and the highest throughout history. The US imprisons at a rate an entire order of magnitude higher than any other industrialized democracy. It hasn't always been like this. Until about 1980, rates were stable. But the subject of crime and super predators dominated American domestic policy. We started throwing people in prison for crimes like my brother's that wouldn't warrant probation in other countries. And now the US has an unprecedented 2.3 million people in prison. There are another 500,000 people in jail. These are people who have not even been convicted of a crime yet. And another 4.1 million people on probation or parole. When the old facilities filled up, we built new prisons in haste, without thought or reconsideration, without awareness of the psychological and social effects of the spaces that we designed. The failed prison prototypes were rebuilt and rebuilt. The US has created a prison system of 1,800 facilities, a leviathan unmatched in human history. Never before has a supposedly free country denied basic liberty to so many of its citizens. Today, many of the places that were built for 300 now house 3,000. They are spaces of human warehousing. People imprisoned are from the most disadvantaged parts of our society. Most are in for drug crimes, half for marijuana. 2/3 are from severe poverty, half were unemployed. Half have an untreated mental illness. 80% have experienced major trauma and been physically, emotionally, or sexually abused. 70% dropped out of high school. And over 70% cannot read. But what is most appalling is that we imprison more of our minorities than South Africa at the height of apartheid. Racial disparities in prison are striking. White people dramatically underrepresented, and Black people are severely overrepresented. When Bruce Western looked at the risk of imprisonment over one's lifetime, he estimated that almost 60% of young Black men who dropped out of high school will go to prison before they turn 35 years old. For many, prison has become a normative life event, much more normal than attending college. And these struggles and traumas, they are intergenerational, as millions of children are left without their parents. How did we get here? How did we come to believe that caging unfathomable numbers of people is a proper and a humane sanction? Mass incarceration has a direct lineage from slavery. As our colleague Brian Stevenson says, slavery did not end, it evolved. It became Jim Crow, it became convict leasing, it became lynchings, resistance to civil rights, and now mass incarceration. Slavery ended long ago, but the ideology of racial subordination has cast a very long shadow. While the size, shape, and form of prisons has varied, what remains constant is the brutality. Our prison system is the moral scandal of our lifetime. Every day, over 50,000 people, more than sold out Yankee Stadium, wake up in solitary confinement cells like this, with no light, no human interaction, little food or water. People experience oppressive fear, violence, extreme isolation, and are further traumatized. They are stripped of their humanity. Many suffer mental illness. They leave the prison far worse than they went in, and they are unprepared to come back home. But almost everyone is coming home. 95% are coming home. And almost all of the prisons are dislocated hundreds of miles away from the communities inflicted. And once people are released, they face an invisible prison in which they are legally discriminated against in almost every facet of their life. So now, as promised, some hope. These projects, they are not about prison reform. This is about rethinking the whole system. It is time for a change, and it is time to invest in people. Our first project asks, what if we design places for restoration and human dignity? Restoring Promise is a groundbreaking model. It dismantles prison power structures by pairing young incarcerated men with mentors, not guards, not punishers, mentors, people who are trained in mediation, conflict resolution, trauma counseling, and family engagement. And the result is that those incarcerated feel empowered. We also dismantle these power structures in the design process itself. We believe that only those that truly know the system can guide reimagining. We listened and we heard about the importance of little things like fresh air or even the turn of a doorknob. These incarcerated designers created new living spaces. What you see, it's not much. Truth be told, it is not enough. But these little things like paint, furniture, rugs, they make it feel a little more like home. The next project is about preventing COVID-19 outbreaks in prisons. Utilizing our decade of experience with architecture and infectious disease, MAS created a toolkit or simple spatial strategies to achieve safer and more COVID resilient spaces. The first and most important recommendation is to decarcerate. We also shared spatial and ventilation strategies that can avoid the spread of contaminated air. The next project is about reimagining prisons. With Vera, we established the principles of human dignity. What if restorative justice centers were integrated into communities? David Garland describes the prison is used as a kind of reservation, a quarantine zone, in which purportedly dangerous individuals are segregated in the name of public safety. What if, instead of being out of sight and out of mind, what if they were visible and public? What if people had access to therapy to address trauma and begin to heal? What if people could sit in restorative circles, acknowledge harms, and create resolutions? What if justice was part community college, part halfway house? What if people were given access to a meaningful education with different modes of learning embraced and in topics that interest them? What if people could discover their interest, their passion, their calling? What if justice looked like a library? What if people had access to transformative and liberating books, like our current work with the Million Book Project? What if a cell was akin to a dorm room, transformed into a modest but comfortable space to grow, to learn, and rest? What if people had a collective space to break bread and be human together? What if justice smelled like a home-cooked meal? What if meals were prepared and shared as a community? What if people could learn pottery, carpentry, fabrication, how to make things with their hands? What if justice was a place to take a class in something you've never done before? What if justice was access to the finer things in life? What if we gave dignified spaces for leisure and play? What if justice was a space to relax, hang with friends, read books, and learn a new language? What if people had access to nature, a place to restore, meditate, and heal? What if people were given a path to walk to a new future? What if the aspiration of justice was to provide hope and opportunity? This project asks how architecture can imagine a different kind of social flow. It is hypothetical, but it could be real. It should be real. We're currently working on alternatives to prison in both Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. What if we designed projects to reverse all the horrifying statistical realities? Violence, drug abuse, housing, literacy, and unemployment, these are all social problems with solutions. This surely sounds very utopian, but it is very real. Statistics have shown dramatic improvements when people are given access to the resources that they need. For example, only 10% of people return to prison, as opposed to 70% when they are simply taught how to read. The projects that I've discussed so far, they are micro scale, small scale, to a massive and broken system. They are a first step towards the ultimate goal of abolishing prisons. So now I invite you all to expand our ideas of justice and imagine with me, how might we create a more inclusive society? What if, instead of designing spaces that punish, isolate, and dehumanize, what if we invest in healthcare, education, housing, and equity? What if justice was about healing our bodies and our minds? Jails and prisons have become de facto psychiatric institutions. But mental health and drug treatment are far less expensive. At Mass, we believe that buildings can heal. Our team has designed healthcare centers in the most underserved regions, like this first of its kind cancer center. or this community health center and affordable housing campus that connects an immigrant community to the waterfront and celebrates local art and culture? What if we imagine society through equitable housing? Our social values are really highlighted in this chart. This shows the trade-off in funding between housing and corrections. What if we flip this? What if we invested in affordable housing? At Mass, our focus on housing began here. And we have come to recognize that safe and equitable housing is the basis of community health, well-being, and economic vitality. Whether it is apartments that allows elders to age within their community, or a domestic violence shelter that embraces survivors as whole people. Our punitive ethics, they tend to revolve around personal responsibility, around reaping what one has sown. But when we hold an individual responsible by establishing laws, enforcing them, and sentencing people to prison, we should also ask ourselves whether we have done our share to ensure that each person is given a decent set of opportunities for a good life. We need to ask whether we as a society have fulfilled our collective responsibility to ensure fair conditions for each and every life. We could send 3 or 4 people to college for the price to incarcerate a single person. What if we nurtured personal growth and invested in education? We have designed an educational center that is based on different types of learning. A university dedicated to global health equity. We have envisioned the library as a celebration of human potential. And finally, what if we reimagine society by creating spaces of equity? Memorials have the power to remind us about who we once were, so that we can understand who we are, so that we can decide who it is that we want to become. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice is a monument for a society that is scarred by slavery, racial terror, segregation, and by lynchings. From the exterior, the building resembles a familiar colonnade on a green. But as you continue, the ground drops and these columns rise above you, reflecting the public hangings, reckoning with the unspeakable atrocities of our past. Identical markers rest outside, and counties where lynchings occurred are invited to embrace the truth of their history and claim their marker. And over time, maybe the memorial grounds will become a representation of national healing. These are heavy topics, but I want to leave you with a bit of hope and a bit of love. Coretta Scott King said, "Love is such a powerful force. It is there for everyone to embrace. It is that kind of unconditional love for all humankind. It is that kind of love that impels people to go into their community, to change conditions for others, and take risks for what they believe in." The sculptor, Hank Willis Thomas, was inspired by that photo. And the King Memorial honors the civil rights movement and also how an individual can inspire a nation. It celebrates the extraordinary and unmatched force of love. So there it is. I leave you with a monument to love. And I know I was skeptical too, because I do not do public displays of affection, but I have become a believer in revolutionary love. Valerie Kaur says, love is more than a rush of a feeling that happens to us if we are lucky. Love is sweet labor. It is fierce. It is bloody. It is imperfect. It is life-giving. Love is a choice that we make over and over again. And the choice to love can be a choice for justice. My love for my brother and for all of our incarcerated brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers, that love has brought me here today to fight this fight 17 years later. So as for the future of restorative justice, the investment in beauty is this investment in hope, because justice is not possible without beauty. For us as designers and architects, justice, it is beauty. Thank you.
Wow, Annie, thank you so much. And yeah, I think the question, how is architecture related to this, was fully answered. Wonderful, this vision. And it's also great, I think, in Rescaled, we tend to talk a lot. And you show it a lot with your images, and it really makes a big difference in how we look at the vision that we have. So thank you so much for this. We have a few questions coming in from the audience. One asks, Annie, you mentioned visible and open to the surroundings. Isn't there a risk that this stigmatizes, that people say, look, that's where the criminals live, and feed the fear if they are for people that committed crimes only? So if you make specific centers for people with a criminal record and not put them in a house that already is for people with a mental disability that haven't done anything wrong, wouldn't this lead, so the more visible it is, could it also lead to more stigmas and have a reverse effect?
I think the only way we come to understand that these are people, our families, our communities, is if they stay in our communities. We can't get anywhere when people don't even realize this is happening when it's hundreds of miles away. I think that houses like this, centers like this, can act in the same way that any other sort of community resource could be, like supportive housing, for example, that we do now. Nobody knows that that's like people who are at the 20% poverty line when they live there. We don't put like a big sign out there. There's no reason to not get people the resources that they need and to stay connected to their community.
Yes, but also there is let's say half the population believes that people have done something wrong. It's basically mostly the fault of their surroundings, and with the right help they can be on the righteous path. And half the population believes that a criminal is a criminal, just lock them up because they won't ever be better people. How do we also, if we have a community integrated place, how do we, well, hopefully open the eyes of the other half of the people and make them believers?
I think people will probably believe when they see it. They don't see it right now. And right now what people don't see is that we create a worse condition by sending people far away, treating them horribly. People who weren't violent offenders when they went in become that because they are treated like animals and not human beings.
Okay.
Well, I think the only way this changes is if people know and if people are integrated and a critical part of our society. And it could be seen as an asset. These could be public. Like a house could be situated around a restaurant that's open to the public, for example.
Yes. Yeah, we can. Yeah, they're very community integrated, where also they provide services to their surroundings. One other question that came in is, Annie, the restorative centers you pictured, aren't they another one-size-fits-all place? If we have the notion that all the needs of people that are currently in prison are so different because they have such different backgrounds, needs, and reasons that led to their misbehavior, then is the one restorative justice center the solution for all of them?
No, absolutely not. There should be tons of these things all over, and they should be based on so many different things, whatever the needs are, whether it's someone who really needs mental health care versus someone who didn't get an education that served them and their interests. Like, We need so many different kinds of these. I show one example of a small sort of suburban setting. These could be anywhere. These should be in our cities. They should be everywhere so that people have access to the resources that they need.
Yeah, but of course there need to be many at many places, but also is every restorative justice center different? Is one focused on young people, the other on old people, one on people who just started a criminal career, and another on the veterans? Is one placed on people who have mental disabilities? Maybe one who are sex offenders are different from people who stole something? How do you envisage the different forms of these centers?
I think that people are all different and they need to be individualized. That's a critical piece of this. There is a very clear connection, for example, between academic failure and going to prison. It's called the school to prison pipeline. And so much of that academic failure is because we have this one size fits all sort of mentality, this one type of teaching, and it doesn't fit for many, many people. And a lot of people fall through the cracks. Like, I mean, I think we could talk about this in so many different ways, from mental health to education, but I think it is critical that we address whatever the root causes are for an individual. And that may mean house that has 5 people, and maybe there's a community center that has 30 people. I don't know what this means exactly, but I think that it has to be individualized.
And does that mean that you basically have one center and a person walks in there or is placed there and you think, what are your needs? And we're going to provide this in this house, or we are going to build some house that look completely different, have different programs, have different levels of security, different ways. And then we look, this person fits best in this center and this person fits best in that center.
Yeah, potentially. Like, I think there are so many organizations and services that we already have in society too, that people can also plug into. That doesn't, we need to build some of these places, but there are also many services that exist now that people need to be able to reach, you know? Like, yeah, I think that these things should be all around us. They should be an integral part of our society instead of turning our backs.
Wonderful. And
we got to plug them in.
And we're going to talk more about how we can prepare these places that already exist for people with a criminal background. Then we're going to talk later. But first, you get one more comment. It's Annie. One more question you get. Can I show it? Oh, great, Annie. How you energize, you spread it away. So yeah, you made an impression. Thank you so much. Then Indira. I want to keep some discussions for later, but first we'll ask you, can you give your presentation about what you're doing?
Yes, I will certainly do that. But first, Annie, thank you so much for this beautiful presentation. You can't hear the audience, but they must be clapping loudly for you. It's a wonderful story. It needs to be told and it needs to be taken up by architects. So I'm really, really happy that you shared this lecture with us. And my kind of story is quite different, actually. It's much more on a practical level. So I feel a bit like unsettled after your heartfelt story. But what I can do maybe is give examples of how you can shape the dialogue towards a more human form of detention and housing. And maybe I can also show some examples from the Dutch architectural history and the Dutch perspective on how we have done this before, how we have gone through these processes before, and how we can also do this in detection housing. So that's how I will try to do for you.
Yes,
and then I will start my presentation.
Yes, and it's work. We are going to see your screen. Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. I have a maximum of 20 minutes, right? So probably you want me to be a bit quicker as we are maybe running out of time.
We still have some time, but we also want to have some discussion afterwards.
Okay, So, okay, let me then. So the Amsterdam Architecture Center is basically a center where we do all kinds of architecture activities. Can be exhibitions, can be walks, can be talks, can be anything. But it's mostly focused on the development and the design issues in Amsterdam and its region. And as Amsterdam, of course, is also the capital city of the Netherlands, it's also on a national or international scale. And we do this by connecting our exhibitions and our daily events to our what we call a 5D Expo Lab, which connects topical developments in Amsterdam to small-scale experiments on 4D models, AR, projection mapping, etc., to be able to discuss and share design issues in the city with its inhabitants, with its policymakers, with its architects and urban planners. And today I was invited to explain a bit more about the exhibition that we have currently going on, which is called Safe Spaces, the Right to Space in the City. And the start of this exhibition was actually that the Dutch Design Week people came to us and offered us this installation. And this installation celebrates 40 years of the Hubertus House, which is a house for women that met violence and their children, and they need a home to stay and to be safe. And it would sound and seem so logical to house them somewhere far away, somewhere hidden behind an anonymous facade. But the architects did not do that. They designed this beautiful house in all colors of the rainbow, right next to the street, from the firm belief that there is a kind of protection in visibility. And that made us think on if we could find more examples in Amsterdam architecture that do exactly that. So the basis of our exhibition is to show examples of how visibility in public space also provides a natural protection for groups under threat. And architecture and or design can contribute to a positive form of visibility, as well as a safe context for social recognition. And I think that is maybe why Veronique invited me to share this exhibition with you, because these, of course, are the keywords: safe context, but also social recognition. And detention housing is a form of social recognition, as are the abused women housing that I showed before. It is not only the visibility that offers protection, it is also the visibility that takes on a topic in society that needs to be dealt with, that makes it public, that makes it part of a debate that needs to be done. So first things we ask the visitors is to assess their own neighborhood and living environment. Do they feel safe in their environments, and why do they feel safe? And so we have a few parameters like high volume crime, high impact crime, but also the risk perception and avoidance of places where you can go. And what's interesting in that is that there is a big difference between feeling safe and being safe. And this could also be very, very worthy in the debate about detention housing, because usually there is a lot of bias around safety. This, for example, is the neighborhood in the southeast of Amsterdam that we know as a post-war neighborhood with lots of crime and lots of poverty, low education, and etc., etc. But when we look at the crime rates, they are actually quite low, whereas the perception of risk and fear and safety is actually quite high. So you are actually quite safe in these neighborhoods, even though you may not feel safe. And the other thing is happening, the other side around, is happening in the city center of Amsterdam, let's say the red light district, which is of course the monumental center, and people feel safe there. They don't experience any kind of harm that might be done to them, but the crime rates are actually quite high. So it's quite an unsafe place to be. And it's interesting to make these comparisons between all the different neighborhoods, because the next question, of course, is if you feel safe or if you are safe, how can you relate to those feelings or those facts and the design of public space? So we asked the municipality of Amsterdam how the public designers are actually trained, or what kind of guidebooks they have to design public space. And they were a little bit embarrassed about that question, because the tools that the urban planners in the city department have are mostly functional. So they can do something with cameras, they can do something with lighting, they can do something with accessibility for generic people, their generic use. So thinking from the perspective that if everybody can use it, then it's probably okay. But now it's turning around, and they are coming more and more to the conviction that it's maybe better to design specific places, because if you design a place that is meant for a specific group, even if it's only meant for a specific group, you will see that much more people will use the same area for different reasons, but because they feel that it's a place that is loved, that people are connected to, and that they can actually use. And then the other thing that's of course quite interesting is that even though you can design whatever you like, design can also be part of bigger problems in society, like for example gentrification, which is of course a very kind of painful phenomenon. That the more beautiful you make your neighborhoods, your streets, your houses, the more prices go up, and the more gentrification processes happen. But even if you make all that go away, you can still have lots of issues like ethnic profiling or gender mainstreaming, which still makes people not feel welcome in a neighborhood. So this is an example of, let's say, a generic square on the top, and a very, very specific place, which is like a skateboarding area. Of course, it wasn't designed for elderly people, or it wasn't designed for parking your car. But you can see how this place is being used, and how it also attracts other kinds of uses and other kinds of people, and how it actually becomes much more or much less anonymous. So that's what we did in this exhibition. So I'm going up one floor up, and then we came to make a selection of buildings that we know in Amsterdam that can be placed on a scale of claims to space in society. And then you can divide between exclusion to inclusion, and from hidden unknown to a visible, or the possibility to meet. And it's very, very interesting to see how all these different groups and claims are also in different points in the process. So, for example, when in 1942 the first independent housing for working single women was actually realized, it was a big thing, of course, in 1942. But it made it visible to society that it was actually okay, actually quite normal to be single, to be a woman, and to work, and to have your own space. And so they are now, let's say, a bit further up the claims for space ladder. The same things might work for the LGBT community in Amsterdam, although that's kind of going down recently. But the monument, the LGBT monument that was built in 1984, which gave it, as Annie also mentioned, a very, very concrete actual space to gather, to commemorate, to celebrate, to be there, to be visible, did a great deal for actually making them visible as a group also, or as an identity in the city. And on the other part of on the left side of the diagram, you can see how, for example, refugees have no place in society. If they are anywhere, they are going from one place to the other, always temporal, always on the fringes of the city, and nowhere connected to where the city life is actually happening. And once they are hidden away, far away, it's also very difficult to be in contact, not only for the refugees themselves, but also for the people that already live in the city center. So there's no connection, there's no possibility to meet, there's no opportunities for familiarity to grow. Same things happened, of course, with the gentrification, as mentioned. But another very interesting episode in the Dutch social housing industry, which was quite forgotten is that when Suriname became independent in 1974, lots of people came to live here, and they were actually barred from social housing in the city centers, and they were also barred from the extension areas on the fringes of the city. Only after they squatted the area, they got access to these types of housing. And then in our exhibition, I found it really, really important not to show these angry Black people wanting their housing. So we showed pictures of how there was solidarity between people of color and people that were white, and how they could work together, and also how there were two children actually, so that you can present a different framework for these claims, because they are actually very, very just. So then going back to what does it look like in the street, these claims for space? These are claims from the faithful, religious people, varying from temples to synagogues to churches. But very interesting, for example, is also the emancipation process, for example, in the Muslim in the mosque area, whereas the picture on the middle, on the bottom line, it's just like in Amsterdam, a regular street with all these doors, and then at some point a few doors have arches indicating a mosque that's behind it. And that's of course the beginning of, let's say, a claim that became more and more supported and ended in this Western mosque, which is on the right bottom picture, a very, very visible big building that actually is also a claim for an evidence for acceptance in society. Now, these are examples from the LGBT community and the Feminist City, ethnic groups and different possibilities. So all these examples are being collected in this exhibition. And then we hope that we can start a conversation on what does it actually look like if there is a right to space, and how does it make you aware of how appropriation of space is also a contribution to a public and a diverse city. And after the next question, of course, is because these are positive claims to space. These are claims to space connected to identity. There are also claims to space which are based on needs, because nobody feels proud being poor or being homeless, or being disabled. But it's a space and a right to space that needs to be recognized and needs to be dealt with, and it asks for like an extra level of sensitivity maybe to the city. So then in our last floor, we offer different perspectives on what possible solutions could be found, and on designing or redesigning this diverse and open city. And this is a conceptual project by Studio 9 Dots, where they try to design unplanned or unprogrammed space. Because if you have a diverse, a free city, you need places to be free, to be diverse, to have no claims. So you need a place for artists, you need like cultural spaces, and they are being pushed farther and farther back to the fringes of the city, and by now also outside of the city. So we try to find space that is somehow destinated to an open use, that has no pre-programmed function, but that can be used in various ways by various people at various times of the day. And that needs a different kind of policy, a different kind of planning devices and tools, which exactly is what the municipality of Amsterdam is now working on. Another example is by Bogomir Doringer, which is an artist and sociologist that I really, really like. And he has been researching dance cultures all over the world. And there is, of course, a very interesting connection between dancing, as dancing is also its movement and it's a claim for space. You use space while dancing. But when you are with many, many people claiming space and dancing, it can actually become a political movement. And this is an example from Georgia, where the political protest against the dictatorship in Georgia actually was born and fed and organized from this underground dance scene. And then the last, let's say, perspective on how such an inclusive city might look like is the Feminist City. So we have been doing a program, a kind of a book club, a reading club actually, on a few of the very important feminist theoretical works by Newell Puar, by Leslie Kern, by Sarah Ahmed, and we came to the conclusion that a feminist city is not a city for women. Of course, it's a city in which differences in gender, race, and physical limitation no longer create inequality, and where all users feel safe, seen, understood, and recognized. And what is interesting is that these feminist debate and theoretical research uses very specific words, and I wanted to mention them here today because they might actually be very helpful, because if you want to shape a dialogue towards how we can use detention housing, you maybe need new words. And to be able to do this discussion in Dutch for the Feminist City, we translated these very, very specific Dutch or English terms into Dutch words. And that's interesting because usually the meaning of these words is not so obvious. There are usually different layers of meaning also in the English sentence. So a straightening device is like a kind of an interior correction, a correction that is somehow, you aren't actually aware of it, but any time that somebody says something, maybe it's strange that we've been doing it all this time like that. But but that's okay. We always do it like that. So a straightening device is a something that makes it very, very difficult to try and find new ways and new ways of looking. So you need willful characters. You need people that are actually have the courage to speak up and to say, no, this is not okay. This is we need to do something about it. And then they may become something like what in feminist theory is called an affect alien, which is actually a very, very difficult position to be in, because it needs you to be a killjoy. In a group of people, in a dominant group, you need to be courageous enough to say, no, it's not like that. We should do it differently. And if it works, and if you keep repeating it, then usually it is possible to come towards a more positive change that feels also positive for, let's say, the dominant group. And then, of course, the space invader is very, very interesting. And there are so many examples of space invaders in all sorts of situations. So it's very interesting for everyone on a personal level to ask oneself, when was I a space invader? Because it can be anywhere. And there's no problem in being a space invader. The problem is, of course, in when you're not allowed in after having invaded that space. So for the very, very obvious examples are, for example, from the research from Newell Puar, who researched the entry of women in the English Parliament. So when you enter this male space that is completely designed for men, for male rituals, for male ways of behavior, and in no way connected to how a woman could work there. And another famous one is, of course, Rosa Parks in 1955, when she took place when she took the white part of the public transport in the bus. So that's a very obvious form of space invading, but it can go anywhere. So we ask architects to give examples of how that would work today. And these are very interesting examples. On the bottom top left, you see a school that has been designed for people with and without disabilities. So let's say normal people, disabled children, mentally ill children are all in the same school building. And that actually breaks boundaries. It breaks boundaries between what is normal, what is not normal. And it's also a learning environment for a different kind of needs and habits. And on the top left is a protest action by the students of the Technical University in Delft, when they were once again confronted with an all-male lineup in a symposium, and they brought these chairs and they put names of women speakers that could have been there as well with them, and put them in part of the audience, to make everybody aware of what what was missing in this context. And the greenery is of what inclusivity can also mean nature, animals, stuff like that. So that's the end of how this exhibition works, and which is meant to make people aware of, visitors aware of, that a safe city is also a creative city, is a city where you have room for self-expression, and thus justice at a more diverse city and more justice in the city, because that's of course where Amanda Gorman is right, and what is nice in this context as well, also referring back to Annie, what just isn't always justice. So if we take this context of this exhibition, that's just 2 more minutes, Rogier, to Dutch examples in a broader sense to the matter of detention housing. This is an open call, a home away from home, done about 5-6 years ago, to find new housing solutions for refugees and other urgent groups. And I won't show them all, of course, but it's interesting. This is an inventory of where refugees are housed today, and you can see the enormous diversity in types of housing. So Annie is completely right when she says there is no need to do something a once and for all solution, or a one fits all solution when you do small scale. There are so many different ways to design, and also so many different types of buildings already existing or new that can be used for small scale housing in various ways. And if you look at the winners of this exhibition, they have one thing in common. It's not only small scale, it kind of guides and guards privacy versus public space, but it's always connected to a sense of integration, of feeling home, of connecting to employment, of connecting to education. So I think there, of course, are also the solutions to detention housing on a more human scale. And in Finland, there's a similar open call where they simply inventorized all the vacant houses already existing in Finland. So you don't need to build one single new home to be able to house all the refugees. And this is my last slide. Annie referred to that as well, that maybe there is hope to be found in the process that already happened in psychiatry and hospitals, that there are 4 stages that may also be applicable to detention housing, and that maybe after the victory of all these prisons that we now can make, and how we have scaled it up and found this mass integration, how we can now go to stage 4, in which we can empower the patient, at least in psychiatry, and how we can make small scale to fit treatment and housing. And then it's interesting to also look at inclusion in city fabrics, but also the other way around. So if you cannot, that's also interesting for detention housing, I think. If you cannot, because it's unsafe or unpractical or unwanted to house detention inside the city, you can also bring the city inside the detention house. So anybody being in the Netherlands, please come and visit this exhibition. It's open until September this year. Thank you so much.
Wow, wonderful, Indira, for giving us this such a quick tour through such an extensive and so interesting exhibition. Veronique, yeah, we have heard so much from these two presentations. What would you say? What are the answers and the new questions that have arisen when we talk about replacing prisons by small-scale detention houses? From what you've heard.
Well, thank you, first of all, Annie and Indira, for sharing your thoughts and ideas. And I still get inspired by so many words you're saying. And I think the one that really stuck was also like claim your space. And also a slide that Annie showed, public housing versus correctional centers. And I think that's that's what we're talking about. At the end, we all want our space within the city or a village, but we want to claim our space. And how do we do that? And what's the road towards that towards the future? And I think you both of you showed a lot of good examples. And I know earlier when I was talking to Annie, we were talking about there are individual interventions that's the reintegration process. That's very much the narrative in the Netherlands, that we need to reintegrate people. But there's also architectural intervention, and that's maybe the restorative justice design labs, where we at least make it a little bit better, and these micro interventions. But then there's also societal or social interventions, and I think that's what Indira also showed and talked about. And once you start doing that, how do you design that process? And that we all have
Yeah. Okay. Hey,
but can I ask
one
one question, because I'm really curious about what Annie thought of Indira and vice versa. So
yeah. Okay. Let's start with Indira. When you listened to Annie, what was the first thing that came to your mind, or the most important thing?
Well, yeah. Well, I hope I conveyed that before doing my lecture. I was really because you need this kind of connection to the topic, maybe to also to bring this to a next level. It's so important for architects to take up this topic, because it is, of course, not only a design topic, but architects can do so much. And I was really impressed with Annie's presentation on how it both addresses an issue, which is an issue in society, and how you can respond in architecture to solve that.
Wonderful. And Annie?
Thank you, Indira. I think your presentation was so powerful too. I think you've shown this breadth too of different ways that we talk about these issues and what justice is in society, and how you're really getting to the heart of what an inclusive society can look like. I love these diagrams too about how we move from acceptance and this very act of claiming space, making something visible that's usually invisible, are groups of people who are made invisible in our society. But the act of giving them space is such an act of importance. It gives them, I think it gives so much to them and also to our society. If we want this inclusive, diverse society, I think that's the first step.
And one of the questions that is coming in is, was there also an inquiry to our target group of currently inmates, how they want to create our space of public space? So have we involved our target audience in the designs that we are now discussing?
You have people that you have claims to space coming from identity, like being female, like ethnic identity, like a religion identity, like a gender identity, which is very, very visible and helps an emancipation process. But maybe inmates do not take their identity from being incarcerated. So it's very difficult to claim your own space, because there is also shame, there is also impossibility, there is also poverty. So I don't know. I'm quite sure there must be so many projects that include inmates on how they would design their own environment, or what would be ideal. But it's not that easy to go public as an inmate. This is how we want to live, because it's actually not their problem, it's a society problem. It's in that sense comparable to disabled people. They don't need to solve their own access to a theater or to a street. But it's society that needs to solve that.
Yes, but also Annie, a former prison director I know, and who's also involved in our movement, says, well, if you ask the most people that are currently in the prison what they want, the current system where you just sit, you get 3 meals a day and just play ping pong, and being a criminal is a good thing because that's how you get status in there, compared to the restorative places where you have to work on yourself, you have to face what you're doing, you have to work and improve. A lot of them say, well, I'd rather go to prison.
I think that if that's the case, that's speaks pretty poorly of our prisons. Like, I think that people, and really not just prisons, our society, if people can't get 3 meals a day and they feel like they need to be imprisoned in order to eat, that is a failure on the rest of us. Like, there are so many better ways to not only feed people, but to have people be an integrated part of society. When I think of the loss of our society by losing all of these people, by locking them away. Like my brother, for example, is a very talented, smart person. He could have given so much, and he lost the formative years of his life by being put away. And millions of people are in the same position. It's really our loss.
And
Yeah.
I think we should also be very careful about talking about they. Personally, I see people in prison as a bubble of air. Once you try to grab it, it just dissolves into air. Because when you look at people, they are people that need, for example, care, or they need education. So why talking about they? What do they need?
Yeah. Also, if we say they're diverse,
Good point.
yeah, don't treat them as a uniform group. I have one discussion point I want to put. So if we say we should basically bring the people that are currently in prison into the regular society, in the homes you already have, in the places we have, in the societies we have, what do we need to do to make them suitable for people to have committed crime? So let's say we have a house for people with mental challenges. They get a little coaching to survive the difficulties of our current system. They get a little help with the things they have troubles with. Can we just say, okay, we bring people with a criminal record in there as well? Or do we need to prepare these places for people who've committed crimes in order for the communities to accept it, in order for the people already living there, not who are already vulnerable, to not pull them in a more vulnerable place, and also the people who work there? What are the most, and it's also a question to the audience, what are some people we need, what are some of the things we need to do to make them ready for it?
I think we need to remove the stigma to begin with. Like the idea that people are discriminated against for a system that puts them there, the overwhelming majority of people should not be there. They shouldn't. Like, it harms them. There are very few people there who are actually a real risk to society and need to be separated. Very, very few. Most are not violent. My brother was considered a violent offender, and he was not a violent person. Like, that's the first thing, is that these are not some horrifying people. These are our people and our community who we're losing.
Annie, I completely agree with you, but we have a large part of our society who rather locks 99 people up, locks 100 people up, for which 99 people it wasn't necessary, but to prevent this one person from committing another crime. So if we remove the stigma, maybe we're going to help 99 people in the way they should be helped, but one person will break free, commit something, do something to some of the other people. Then it's hard to remove the stigma if this is the priority of a lot of people.
I think that's a crime. Locking up 99 people who are innocent and shouldn't be there, that is a crime of society.
And how do we, because if the Dutch Minister of Justice has to report to Parliament, say, yes, something went wrong, he has to go away. How can we change this, where we accept some risk and we rather have good results and maybe some not so good, and we reduce the stigma and we create space for trial and error and success?
Probably it starts with accepting some risk, I would say, and creating visibility is the second one, because as soon as there is a form of visibility, the stigma will be removed, because in 99% of the cases, nothing happens. It's all okay, it's all fine. So that also asks for allowing space, creating space for them being there. Them, not them.
And one important thing I think is also is not that we say criminals are the problem of the system, let's put them away somewhere, but that people say it's our, they're part of our problem, and also it's a problem we as a society allowed to create, so now we're gonna fix it ourselves. How do we prepare society for taking up this new role of being part of the solution instead of looking away?
What I find interesting in Veronique's approach is that actually a word as criminal no longer exists. So there are maybe crimes or misdemeanors, or how we call them. My English is not that specific, but they usually come from mental issues or lack of healthcare, lack of education, lack of housing. So if we would accept it or define criminality as such, then you would also find different solutions.
Veronique?
Yeah, I think what was mentioned earlier, perception versus reality, and that's part of that's on our shoulders to take on the responsibility of what is actually reality and what is just a perception. And yeah.
We need to break the circle somewhere. If it's an invisible problem, we'll see it as a they problem. But we only allow it to be visible if we see it as our problem. Where to break the circle? First build a house or first build a support?
First,
The house builds the support.
sorry, Indira.
Yeah.
No, the house builds the support, I would say.
If you all could give us one advice to how can we prepare our societies for these houses and for this support, what should be the number one assignment you want to give to the Rescaled movement? Annie, I'm going to start with you.
My advice, I think, would be to think of them as people, to treat every person with human dignity as if your family member, your brother, your father, your sister, your aunt made a mistake. How would you want them to be treated? What services would you want them to get? How do you think they would be better prepared to live in our society? And when you think of people as humans, as part of your human family, I think you have a much different response to this crisis.
Indira?
I would say there is protection in visibility, and that goes both ways. So visibility also protects society and also protects them. So there is a very strong safety in visibility both ways, and it can be designed. So yeah, architects like Annie have an important role here.
Veronique, what are some of the lessons of today?
Well, I just want to thank you both for being visionaries for this, for the path we are on, and for sharing your ideas and thoughts. Really grateful, and gonna integrate it into my work. Definitely.
Yes, wonderful. We're definitely gonna integrate a lot of the. We're not sure about the royalties we have to pay for using our slides, but we're definitely interested in taking them on board. And I think for the both of you, a very important lesson is also. I think the Rescale, the people who are along working on making the prison system better or changing it are very much a language-focused people, and show don't tell is so important because the images are so powerful and examples and not just a theory. It's very, very beneficial.
And study feminist vocabulary. It's really, really useful.
Thank the audience as well for being here and listening in, and feel free to email us with thoughts, ideas, anything. You're always welcome.
Yes. Thank you so much. And let's work together to rebuild our prison system from the ground up without prisons. Thank you so much. Have a great day.